Thank you for the introduction, Greg. Appreciate you saying Illinois instead of Illinois. But welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate the invite to speak. I heard that last month Garrett gave a great talk on ESG, so I've got some big shoes to follow. But I'm really hoping to talk a little bit more focusing on that social aspect and looking at my experiences and some of the things that I think we need to focus on going forward. So I won't bore you too much with my history, but I do want to get a little bit of background just for context. I am from Illinois. We had no idea what oil field is, what drilling rigs are, anything. So I grew up with an engineer as a dad, stay-at-home mom. She never stayed at home. She actually ended up working as a teacher's aide, worked for special ed, supporting those children, and then ended up going back to school while I was in high school. We actually graduated a year apart from one another. So I had that great inspiration my entire life, watching somebody who probably held 10 jobs, of which none of them were paid, and still managed that with their family. So I think that's my inspiration for trying to go out and grow beyond small town Illinois, away from farming country. And my dad was determined that I also wouldn't follow in that path. So his goal for me was to go to school for engineering. And I decided to choose mechanical engineering because it was the most diverse. Because my goal was to get out of Oklahoma, or to get out of Illinois, and not to be a typical engineer. But I was just going to go to school for engineering to get dad off my back. And I've actually been really privileged. I've had a unique career that's been anything but being a typical engineer. When I started with H&P, I was a field engineer working on rig optimization, drilling optimization. I ended up moving into the data analytics world, so surrounded myself with IT and how we can better use technology and data to run our world. And then I jumped over to superintendent, so went from everything tech and data and new to nothing new. Everything is how we've always done it. Very traditional line of work, but it's been great. Working with our field employees, it was truly inspiring just to see what they do every day. Then I ended up going to sales, and your entire job is eating and drinking and making friends, and exact opposite of superintendent. And then now I'm back to operations, so it's really been a full circle for me. And the biggest thing that I picked up during all of that time was the different perspectives that it brought to me. Each time I went through a transition, I felt like I had a pretty well-rounded perspective. Each of my jobs, I've had the opportunity to work with all of those same entities that I ended up working in. And I always felt I had an understanding of where they were coming from and what they were thinking about. And every time I got maybe a month or two into that job, about the time that you've been completely drenched with all the fire hoses you've been drinking from and you're fully immersed into the job, I realized that my well-rounded perspective was absolutely one-sided, and I had no idea what I was doing in that new role. So really just had to jump in and immerse myself into what those people in that role were thinking, and then completely change my point of view, and had to do that every single time. As a couple examples, as an engineer, I was always amazed how difficult it was to get somebody to focus on, utilizing the e-driller effectively, or why can't we focus on using our process maps for a rig move? And then you become the person that's managing those groups, and you realize, well, those things are tiny drops in the bucket of the things that they're focusing on. Looking at sales, I always was thinking, why can't we get that in the contract? Or why is that so hard to agree to? We're all working in operations. Why is it not set up from the operations perspective? And then you go fail at negotiating a few of those contracts, and you go, oh, that's why. Makes sense. And then I came back to operations, thinking, okay, I've now been through all of those groups. Like, I totally got it. I got the viewpoints. I understand where people are coming from. I feel like all we need to do is work together, talk about it, and then you remember that operations are over 6 states and 2 time zones and 24 hours, and priorities changing by the minute, and you're thinking, oh, well, talking doesn't always happen. So along with those changes in perspective, I also found that with that thought that I had the right viewpoint, you also get a sense of security in making assumptions. So assuming that I knew the changes ahead, how to manage them, I assumed that I knew how people would react and could adjust. And then I assumed that I knew the people we needed to make whatever we were working on work. So as I was thinking about how my experiences related to the changes we were going through in the industry, we're focusing on working differently with a significant viewpoint on ESG initiatives, trying to grow and sustain our industry while the marketing of our industry is fairly negative at this time and has a lot of stereotypes associated with it. We're trying to diversify our workforce and our operations, but we're seen as a legacy place to work and not somewhere new. And what I feel is holding us back is exactly that, those assumptions. And I know that there are assumptions outside of our industry. We know what we do and we know who we are, and we can't necessarily change those outside assumptions. What I'd like to focus on today is the assumptions that are coming from within. We're going through changes, but those changes are starting to outgrow what we know and what we have always done. So just like the job changes I went through, I might have felt like I had a grasp on what was needed and could assume that it often was going to turn out in one way. But every time I put myself into that other role's shoes, I realized that they didn't have the answer, I didn't have the answer. And the only way that we were going to come to a resolution was absolutely putting aside what we knew and starting with something fresh. So as you can imagine, I am no stranger to being on the receiving end of some of these assumptions, getting into the social aspect. So when I started with H&P, I didn't know the difference between a drilling rig, a pump jack, an offshore rig. I honestly didn't even know what those words were. A oil field was a mystery to me. But I was applying to be a drilling optimization engineer, and when I was interviewing, the biggest thing I said is, I don't know what I'm getting into, and I feel like I need to understand. I need to understand the equipment. I need to understand what our people do. I need to be out there. I need to go work on the rigs. And I thought that was obvious. We always train people for a new role that they're starting into. Funny thing though, the person hiring me hadn't even thought of that. Completely jaw drop reaction. At the time, our internship and our new hire program for engineers was the same training. You went out to the rig and you roughnecked. Now that was only for men. We didn't have a internship or a new hire engineering program for women. You just came in and started working. So when I asked to go work on the rig, I got some blank stares and some, we'll get back to you on that. I'm sure we can come up with something. And they did. I think they assumed that I just wouldn't be interested in going to the field. I wouldn't be interested in staying on the rig. So they're like, okay, we'll just come up with something so that she understands what's going on. So they did. They came up with a rotational position. It didn't involve me having to put a crew house on location. I could bounce around to rigs, meet everybody. And it was great. I was stoked. I was so excited to get out there, see the rigs, see the guys, see what we did. And I felt really special, as being kind of that first one. It was awesome. Until I got to the rig, day one, and I realized that not only did they make assumptions around me and what I wanted and what I needed out of this program, they also made assumptions of what the rig crew would do. So it was decided that they would make an announcement, unbeknownst to me, before I got to the rig, that if they heard of any type of comment, behavior, even allowed me to pick up a wrench, like they didn't want me working. Apparently I'm klutzy, I don't know. There would be severe consequences. And I didn't know this announcement was made, and I understand where they were coming from, but I get out to the rig, and I'm walking up to the driller, and I'm like, hey, I'm Amanda, I'm just here to learn what you do, this is cool, and they're looking at me like, hi. Did not make me any friends. It took me several long days and weeks standing in the snow, watching a rig move, which I am absolutely not denying how hard it is to like throw a hammer in a blizzard on a rig move. But do you know how hard it is to stand in a blizzard, in a rig move, not moving, watching the person do that? It's rough. So it took me a long time to really make those friends and get people to open up to me and help me learn. And that's what I wanted to do. And I understood where they were coming from. I understood their concern. You know, this was the first for a company. It was first for everybody. But it turns out that the men on the rigs were just as excited to teach me and to bring me into their crew and be part of the group as I was to learn what they were doing and to be part of their group. So 9 years later, we now have a program. It does allow women to go out and roughneck. We actually had 2 women last summer, and it was awesome. I mean, they went and they got it. Now, there are a few things that they struggled with. I mean, I'm pretty small. I think they're about my size, and 100-pound sacks of bar. Like, you can maybe do a couple of those, and it starts getting a little rough. So, you know, we had to make some adjustments to what they did, but they were ready to show what they are capable of, and I think it's great. And we did the same thing for the men. We're giving them the opportunity to do more of a shadowing learning program, so less about the hard labor. Everyone needs to understand what it takes to do the job, but then also focusing on the education for them. So it's a little more well-rounded. And I'm so proud of our company for doing it. Like, we made it, it's super exciting, but it took us 9 years. So my point is that those assumptions, they didn't harm anybody. They actually made us improve. But I feel it absolutely slowed our progress for a change that most of the company was already ready and willing to make. So jump forward to this year. I was being offered my current position. I was so humbled and shocked. I still am that they selected me, and I'm super grateful for the opportunity to come run the operations that I actually learned about drilling rigs in. But we were going through, you know, the logistics of relocation and stuff, and I am part of a dual career household. And so when we were talking about it, I said, you know, brought up the question, like, what kind of support do we provide for dual career households? And I'm not going to lie, I got the same reaction that I got 9 years ago when I was hired and interviewing when I asked about training on a rig. It's like, big blank stare. I don't know, we can look into it. What do you need? You know, and what ended up coming out is we've never had a spouse have to relocate that had a career that couldn't easily be moved. Now, I'm sure we have. We've been in business for 100 years. It's just the fact that we probably have never asked, and we have always assumed that the other person can move. It's on the family to make that decision, right? So I feel like it was a learning moment for all of us. You know, I assumed we were adjusting more and more to common household setup with 2 careers, and they assumed I was just going to be like everybody else. So now I tell these stories not because they're bad experiences or not because, you know, my company's doing anything wrong. I am proud of what we do and what we've accomplished. These scenarios and experiences have made my career that much more special because I've been part of creating something new for others to follow in. To me, that is extremely exciting. I haven't been the first female to end up in my place, similar, but I do feel like I've been at the forefront of watching that change happen more rapidly. And through my experiences, my firm belief that it's time for us to start questioning our assumptions. We do not have the ability to wait 9 years between finding out something that we are lacking in and creating something new. We're at a turning point where those type of assumptions are going to start putting us out of date. They are slowing our progress. That part of our companies, part of our industry is ready to make. We are just not at the forefront of making that happen. And often, I feel that it is our own assumptions internally that are keeping us from making those decisions. So what we're trying to achieve as an industry, I feel, is revolutionary. We've morphed the oil and gas industry for over 100 years, and we're continuing to do so in this digital age. Our oil field looks nothing like it did, I feel like, 10 years ago, right? But how do we expect to pave the way if we aren't ready to set aside assumptions and start looking for the brand new, ready to make that step change? So if you look at some of our challenges, attracting new talent. How do we attract new talent if we assume who wants to be in our industry? 10 years ago, it was not assumed that I wanted to be in this industry or that I wanted to be in this position. Today, you may assume that I want to be, but then we are still narrowing our scope of where we're looking for that talent. How many times do you see a picture of a roughneck covered head to toe in oil-based mud? How many times do you actually see that on a drilling rig? I know it happens, absolutely. Like, it sucks, but that is the worst day on that roughneck's hitch, right? But that's what we use to advertise. And how does that relate to the new talent we're trying to attract when we are focusing on building real-time centers that provide remote operations? How does that image impact our vision of who that next hire will be when we are competing against industries like solar, wind, technology? And they don't use that imagery, bringing in their talent. How about fitting into the new energy space? How do we say that we are focusing on ESG initiatives? We're being a good steward. We are putting at the forefront of our initiatives. But we only are relying on our own oil and gas experience. Do we actually know best, or are we assuming that we know what's best? How do we attract the expertise that comes with that? How do we bring them into our industry and make them want to help us make an impact? Diversity of people, kind of coming back to attracting new talent, but how are we attracting the new when they're basing what we do, what they hear from us, and what they see, and who they hear from, excuse me. And diversity of thought. How do we ask our rig hands to look at what they can do better, what they can be more efficient at, how they can utilize technology more, when we are also holding them to the traditional way of working? And then marketing, kind of coming back to that vision. We focus on the facts. We know the facts. We know what we provide to the world and how important our industry is. But they're deciding based on how they feel, what they see, how they're impacted. How do we portray ourselves? Are we portraying ourselves as right? Or are we asking questions about what they want and what they need? We're in a shift. The industry has been changing slowly, but I feel that we're at that edge of that chasm where it is continuing to grow rapidly. And we either have to choose to get in front of it or look back and say, well, how did things change so drastically and how are we so far behind? And of course, the hardest piece to change is ourselves. Challenging what we think we know versus what do we need to know, what do we need to change, and who do we need. I can tell you from the experiences that I have been a beneficiary of the changes we're going through. I have fought assumptions, though, the entire way. And not resistance, I do want to be clear. I have been super lucky. I have had support my entire career. I have run into minimal to no roadblocks. But I absolutely have always fought with assumptions. So when we are looking internally at that new hire, who should get the next promotion? What does that process look like? What are we asking of our people? We need to start asking, what do you know? Why do you think you know that? And who can tell you what you actually know? Culture is the hardest thing to change, and we have one that is rooted extremely deep, which is great. It has changed dramatically, and here we are standing today. At the same time, though, along with that deep-rooted culture runs those deep-rooted assumptions. Making that gap between what we do today and where we want to be tomorrow a very large gap to overcome. We do also need to look externally. When we're promoting who we are, looking to make that step change, with our ESG initiatives, we're investing in data and technology, or even just recruiting. We should question, what do others assume about us, and why do they feel that way? We tend to want to inundate with facts, But we don't question our assumptions. So why is anyone else? We need to help people look at us from a new perspective. And it starts with how we interact. But we can't change the assumptions of others. I've learned firsthand that very thing. But what I do know is we do have control over our own assumptions and how we portray that outwards. And I do feel it starts there. So I do ask everybody today, I challenge everybody today, to not question the new. Don't question the different. We're already in the middle of that and moving forward. But I do ask you to question why on the typical. Why do we do things the way we do? Why do we think we need to do them that way? And what should we change? Thank you very much.